This podcast is sponsored by Seawe, Europe's leading photo printing company. Every image you capture tells a story. Discover ideas for curating and creating your special memories and unique gifts for loved ones. From high-quality, personalised photo books to wall art made from your favourite photos. Head to Seawe, that's cewe.co.uk, and start creating your story.
It all started in 1957. The Soviet Union launched the first artificial satellite called Sputnik.
Moscow time 15 hours, 20 minutes, 10 seconds.
Within 12 years, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were walking on the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
But there were other things going on at the time which we don't hear so much about.
The Cold War isn't just a time of fear and uncertainty. It's also an era of ambition, ingenuity, and determination. Britain is stepping into a high-stakes race to the stars. But what role does a popular seaside tourist attraction play in this story, and how did it all begin? This is the story of when Britain joined the space race. Have you ever imagined being a fly on the wall of history? Join me for an insider view of the stories of people, places, and moments that made us. I'm historian Helen Antrobus. Lean in for a tale from time, back when. Our story starts in 1954, at the westernmost tip of the Isle of Wight, where 3 limestone stacks, known as the Needles, rise dramatically from the sea. Perched high above Scratchells Bay stands the new battery at Highdown. Built in the 1890s, this military gunning point once played a vital role in Britain's defences. But after 60 years of service, the guns have been removed. The MOD departs and the new battery has met its fate. By now, Britain is caught in the middle of the Cold War, a tense geopolitical standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union, overshadowed by the threat of nuclear conflict. As tensions rise, the superpowers race to dominate the skies, using the advanced V2 rocket technology pioneered by Nazi Germany during the Second World War. Determined not to be left behind, Britain develops Blue Streak, a missile capable of carrying nuclear warheads over 1,500 miles. But before missiles can be effective, they must survive re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere. And this is where the Black Knight test rocket comes in. Unlike Blue Streak, it isn't built for war, but designed to study what happens to the payload, the nuclear warhead, when it's launched. In 1956, under a shroud of secrecy, Britain starts its journey towards the stars, and the new battery at Highdown roars back into life. Across the island in Cowes, a local aeronautical engineering company is chosen to build the Black Knight rocket.
Britain at that time was developing nuclear power and wanted to have a way of delivering high explosive warheads. My name's Paul Carey, and we're at the Wight Aviation Museum on the Isle of Wight. One of the big companies was Saunders, later became Saunders Roe. Saunders started making gondolas for airships. After the Second World War, Saunders Roe diversed into building helicopters and also looked at rocket power for developing missiles. They did some experiments into this. They built rockets at Cowes, tested them at the Needles, and then shipped them to Australia and launched them.
But just how do you go about keeping a rocket like Black Knight under wraps? Highdown, with its isolated cliffs and ready-made fortifications, became the perfect hidden site for testing the Black Knight rocket. Security is intense. Police officers guard the doorways, Alsatian dogs prowl the perimeter, and secrecy shrouds every operation. The Highdown test site spans 35 acres and is divided into two zones for safety, the preparation area and the firing area. There are equipment rooms, storage facilities, laboratories, and even a staff canteen. Now, decades later, only the weathered concrete firing gantries and the underground control rooms remain. Volunteer Steve Berden takes us inside.
So as you can see, you've got a big iron door. So this big iron door was installed on the front of the magazine for protection in case any of the missiles exploded or there was a fire. So we're now entering the control room 1, which is a brick construction from the 1890s, built underground for protection against any bombardment. But obviously now it's been reutilised by Saunders Row as their control rooms.
One of the engineers who worked here at Highdown is Ray Wheeler. He's responsible for testing the rockets made on site. In a 2011 interview for Island Life magazine, he shared a glimpse of what it was like to be at Highdown.
The rocket head gets very hot and has to protect the weapon inside. So basically, we were testing the nose cone. We tested all sorts of shapes and different materials before we thought we'd got it right.
So in this room, you would find lots of control gear, early computer equipment, and from here they would be able to monitor the activity of the rockets while they were in their gantries being tested.
In April 1957, the team at Highdown hold their breath as they stage the first static firing of a Black Knight rocket.
3, 2, 1.
The test rocket stands tall on one of the two concrete gantries, positioned 130 metres below the cliff top.
The views are amazing. You can't see anything inland because we are in this natural hollow. So when the test firings were going on, the smoke and the vapour would head down the bowl and out to sea and wouldn't be seen by anyone.
For the crew working on site, the landscape isn't just picturesque, it's practical. The hollow acts as natural acoustic shielding, muffling the deafening roar of the rocket engines and minimising the risk of flying debris.
When the rockets were assembled, they would be brought by truck down this ramp to get to either end of the gantries.
Here, engineers clad in protective suits and glass-fronted helmets work with meticulous precision, using hoists to lift the rocket into place within the towering 60-foot gantries.
And it would be fixed to the concrete via those metal pads.
For lead engineer Ray Wheeler, the test firings were particularly nerve-wracking.
At the base of the rocket's first stage sat a metal ball held in place by a hydraulic clamp. If that clamp had failed, Southampton might have found itself with a rocket heading its way.
We descend these steps down into the pump house. So up on the top of Highdown would be a reservoir around about 30,000 gallons.
People mistakenly thought that all that smoke coming out was from the rocket, but it wasn't. It was actually water being poured onto the vehicle to keep it cool.
We are in this fully armoured, very well built observer room. Protection again from a very big, thick steel blast door in case anything goes wrong. You can see the little holes in the wall where the little glass windows are with iron armoured plating so the scientists and observers can see exactly what's going on.
The static firings simulate every aspect of a launch, except for liftoff, ensuring that all systems are operational before the rockets are transported to Woomera, Australia, a remote outback location chosen in case anything goes wrong. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union makes history, taking the world by surprise. On October the 4th, 1957, Moscow radio announces the successful launch of Sputnik 1, the first nation to put a satellite into space. It's not until the following year, in 1958, that America catches up and launches their own satellite, Explorer 1. But despite these groundbreaking achievements across the world, the outlook for Britain's voyage into rocket development looks bleak. On April the 13th, 1960, during a cabinet meeting at Downing Street, Prime Minister Harold Macmillan announces the cancellation of Britain's missile programme. Spiralling costs and safety concerns prompt the government to adopt American missile systems for nuclear deterrence. However, there's a glimmer of hope on the horizon. Later in the year, at a pivotal meeting, scientists propose an ambitious new direction to repurpose some of this British rocket technology towards space research.
There is little doubt that space research is opening a new field of human endeavour with significant commercial, military, scientific and technological implications.
This decision changes everything. The Black Knight rocket is given a new role, still for the military, but as a platform for testing telecommunication and satellite technologies. So the engineers resume their work at Highdown, building and testing the Black Knight rocket until the final launch at Woomera, Australia in November 1965. Paul Carey at the Wight Aviation Museum.
They built 25 of the Black Knight rockets. They launched 22 of them successfully, and they did that within budget and within schedule, something that no other rocket program has achieved either one of those, and they did all of them.
By this time, Britain still hasn't sent anything into orbit, but what it has done is gain invaluable expertise in rocket technology, laying the groundwork for any future space programs. As the 1960s unfold and the space race between the US and the USSR grips the world, plants, dogs, and people are sent into orbit. This is the era of Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey and David Bowie's Space Oddity, where space isn't just science, it's popular culture. But while the Americans and Soviets are busy strapping humans into rockets, Britain takes a different approach. In 1965, they roll out their own space ambitions with a bigger, better rocket, codenamed Black Arrow. This time with the capability of sending Britain's first satellite into orbit. Yet, for the team on the Isle of Wight, the odds were stacked against them, with setbacks on launch days, government funding cuts, and the sheer challenge of competing with the space superpowers. So what did it really take for Britain to reach the stars? To uncover the answer, I've come to a place where the history of British engineering and innovation is brought to life, the Science Museum in South Kensington. I'm meeting Doug Millard, a curator with a lifelong fascination into space.
Hello, you must be Doug.
Yes, I am. Hello.
It's so nice to meet you. I believe you are the person to talk to about all things Black Arrow and Britain's role in the space race.
Well, this museum's chock-a-block full of wonderful things, but I think Black Arrow's one of my favourite.
What made you interested in space in the first place?
Well, in the first place, I'm old enough to remember the Apollo programme, so I watched it on television. You know, I was about 11 years old, so there are very few people around the world who weren't watching the moon landing. But then, of course, Apollo finished. That was the end of an era. Then I got a job at the Science Museum in the Education Department and ended up working with the Space Collection. So it was rather unplanned.
Unplanned, but sounds like the perfect job.
I mean, space in its own right is fascinating, but it's the way in which we explore space. So it's actually about us. It's about the human ingenuity, spirit, inquisitiveness, the ability to build technologies which can take us beyond this rather wonderful planet that we live on.
As we step into the darkened gallery, the walls painted midnight blue to mimic the night sky, I'm hit by a wave of noise and movement.
Doug, you've brought me into the Exploring Space Gallery and you can't help but look up. I can see rockets and engines.
Well, you're quite right. We've got a few rockets here. That long, thin one, that's an American rocket. It's called Scout. But then over there we can see some rocket engines. Now, the biggest one was used on the Apollo Saturn V rocket, which was much, much bigger than Black Arrow. And then over here we look at what we put on tops of rockets, apart from astronauts. And we're standing underneath a Black Arrow rocket.
And there it is, in all its glory, suspended from the ceiling above us, the Black Arrow rocket. It's really impossible not to feel a sense of awe standing beneath it.
We mentioned the Apollo programme, which used an enormous rocket as tall as St Paul's Cathedral in London. But this Black Arrow rocket we're standing beneath was far, far smaller. It was something that was not as well known as Apollo at the time.
It's incredible to have it over your head. It's quite daunting, actually. I mean, you say it's small. It doesn't feel small when you're standing under it.
At 30 metres long, with its silver white body and its distinctive red nose, it's no wonder Black Arrow is affectionately known as the lipstick rocket.
Now, the Black Arrow rocket used to be sitting on the floor, and that's when we started to talk to the guys from the Isle of Wight who built the rocket. All retired.
In 2000, the engineers from the Black Arrow programme were invited to the Science Museum for a very special task: to help take apart and suspend the rocket from the ceiling.
You were dealing with quite a few of the original team, but Ray Wheeler was in charge of Black Arrow programme and Black Knight. And then Jim Scragg, he also worked on the Black Knight and the Black Arrow programmes.
For many of them, it had been nearly 30 years since they had last seen and worked on a Black Arrow rocket.
So one of the questions we needed to ask the team, was it safe to hang the rocket from the ceiling? And then would we be able to separate the stages? Of course, a lot of their memories came back to them when they were playing with their baby.
After all, this wasn't just any rocket. It was a Black Arrow rocket.
So that's what we see now. We have a living diagram of how a rocket uses more than one stage to save weight and to accelerate and get faster and faster and faster, which actually accelerates the satellite, which is the bit that matters, to orbital velocity, which is 17,500 miles per hour.
And that was the ultimate aim for crew members like Ray and Jim, who spent their days on the Isle of Wight building and testing the Black Arrow rocket to successfully launch a British satellite into space. But all the hard work at Highdown was just the beginning. The real test came on launch day. Half a world away, in the sweltering heat of the Australian outback, the team gathered at Woomera, a remote test site where success was anything but guaranteed.
You were out in the Australian outback, so it's very hot, and you did have to wait for any passing wind. Wind was a problem because it might push the rocket off course. And then there'd be the countdown, and then you would see not a great deal because the flames that came out of the Black Arrow rockets were very clean, and you'd have had a lot of dust.
And that dust may have caused the failure of the first launch on the 28th of June 1969.
Dirt and grit got caught up in the rocket chambers, and they kind of went into gimbal lock, so that's why the first rocket failed, and that was 1969. The second launch was 1970, which was successful. But it didn't have a satellite on board, but it at least demonstrated the rocket worked. The third launch was also in 1970, and unfortunately that failed for a different reason. There was a leak in the pressurization system, so if the pressure is not sufficiently high, you lose thrust. And if you lose thrust, you won't get up to the necessary velocity. And that's exactly what happened. There was a leak somewhere, so it didn't carry on going up. It kind of went, then back down and into the ocean.
One last chance remained. On October the 28th, 1971, the team at Woomera watched as the Black Arrow stood on the launch pad for the fourth and final time.
Everything worked perfectly. The teams at the launch site, they witnessed a very nice launch, the first stage. They were tracking it with cameras, fancy things called kinetheodolites, but they then had to wait for a signal from a ground station in Alaska. When they heard that, they knew that the satellite was in orbit and was actually passing over the extremity of North America. So when that signal came through, the champagne corks popped.
After years of work, the Black Arrow rocket had finally achieved its goal. On October the 28th, 1971, it successfully carried the Prospero satellite into orbit. But the victory was bittersweet.
The irony was that even before the successful launch, the programme had been cancelled. Now, the political mandarins had to decide whether to cancel before or after this one final launch attempt. And they thought, if we cancel before, then we'll never know. If we let the launch go and is successful, then at least we know the rocket worked and it will have achieved something. One of the first nations to put a satellite into orbit, and that's why I believe the decision was taken.
Was the mission a success?
4th attempt, successful launch, that's pretty impressive. The satellite itself returned valuable data on how to build a better satellite. That was the whole idea behind this Black Arrow program. And today we have a very successful satellite industry. So Prospero is all part of that story.
And incredibly, Prospero is still orbiting Earth today, though its onboard tape recorder stopped working just 2 years after the launch in 1973. Experts predict it won't re-enter Earth's atmosphere until 2070, 100 years after its launch. The High Down test site finally closed its doors in 1972, donating the R4 Black Arrow rocket to the Science Museum, the very one that Doug and I have been standing under today. And while this might feel like the end of the story, Doug has one more thing to show me. Nestled amongst the artefacts in the display cabinet are 2 small Airfix models, a Saturn V rocket and a lunar module.
There's the rocket and there's the rather strangely coloured blue lunar surface with the lunar module on top. The insulation blanket, it's Bourneville plain chocolate wrapper.
These models were carefully assembled by a young Doug Millard long before he ever saw a real rocket.
And the reason they're here is because my colleague was putting this walkway together. He was wanting to convey the fact that Apollo was watched by kids on telly who then went away and made model kits.
Doug never imagined that one of his childhood heroes would one day see them.
We were down there by Apollo 10 a few years ago doing some filming about space. The star of the show was getting quite old, so I had to go and fetch him a stool. In doing that, I said, I can't resist this, please, but just want you to look at this model which I made a little before you walked on the moon in 1972 on Apollo 17. So Gene Cernan was down there. I just had to say, look, it's all because of you.
Thank you so much for giving all your time to us and expertise.
As I prepare to leave, Doug sums up the story of how Britain joined the space race perfectly.
It is a quintessentially British story, and it rather disrupts the public image of space, which is still predominantly American. So I like the idea of the British space age being put together on this charming island off the south coast of England. Very picturesque, lots of history, views. That's where they actually built space rockets, and that juxtaposition rather appealed to me.
Thank you for listening to the very first episode of Back When. I hope you've enjoyed it. Get new stories as they're released every other week by following us on your podcast app. We would love to hear from you, so please get in touch with your ratings and your reviews. I'll see you next time. And if you fancy visiting the Needles or any other places mentioned in this episode, then check out the links in the show notes. This podcast is sponsored by Seawe, Europe's leading photo printing company. Every image you capture tells a story. Discover ideas for curating and creating your special memories and unique gifts for loved ones. From high-quality, personalised photo books to wall art made from your favourite photos. Head to Seawe, that's cewe.co.uk, and start creating your story.